Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We're here today to talk about ATF's failures and the death of ICE agent Jaime Zapata. You know, there's nothing more difficult than dealing with a person who puts their life on the line for the United States of America, and they get killed doing it, and they lose their life. The Zapata family deserves some answers. Wonderful family. Jaime was one of, I think, 5 children, 5 kids. All those brothers serve in law enforcement, various capacities. And I don't know that the Zapata family is here. I hope they're able to watch on television. I think that they are. But it breaks your heart when you have somebody that young who is serving their nation and their life is taken. And it was violent, and it was, many people believe, preventable. But it's also a responsibility, I believe, of the United States to, and the Congress to understand what happened so that we can try to help prevent it and make sure that never happens again. It's also, I think, an imperative, it certainly is in my heart, to give answers to the family so they can understand what happened and what went well and what didn't go well. And as you'll hear me say time and time again in this committee, we're different in the United States. We are self-critical. We do take a good hard look at ourselves and ask difficult questions. And it's one of the things that differentiates the United States of America from just about every other country on the planet. That you can speak truth to power, you can bring people in, you can grill them and talk to them and answer or ask hard questions and get those answers, and we are self-critical. It's not just here to protect the politically elite or the higher-ups in government. And so what happened on February 15th of 2011, more than 6 years ago now, cartel members in Mexico murdered an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent, Jaime Zapata. Well, he was driving there on ICE business. One of the firearms recovered from the attack traced back to an October 2010 purchase by Otilio Osorio at a Dallas-Fort Worth gun show. The evidence uncovered by the Department of Justice Inspector General shows that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, failed to investigate Osorio, his brother Renferi Osorio, and their associates, who were all part of a straw purchasing ring. Straw purchasing. It's illegal in the United States of America to buy a gun for someone else, and you certainly can't do that for others in mass. It's against the law. Evidently, the ATF potentially missed chances to prevent the firearms in question from being trafficking to Mexico. The ATF knew in June of 2010 that the Osorios were associated with an organization that was likely trafficking firearms to Mexico. In fact, the Inspector General found that by late September 2010, the ATF should have been investigating the Osorio brothers and their associates. As the IG summarized, and I quote, "These were dangerous individuals involved in serious and significant ongoing criminal activities that represented a substantial risk to public safety in the United States and Mexico," end quote. The Inspector General also found a scenario where ATF had both a legal authority and the opportunity to take firearms in the Osorios' possessions, but failed to seize them. Those firearms were also later found at a crime scene. Unlike the Fast and Furious case, which this committee has been vigorously pursuing, where refraining from contacting strong purchasers was part of the flawed strategy, the Inspector General found the Dallas Field Division simply failed to do its job. We'll never know whether Agent Zapata would still be alive if the ATF had done its job properly, and we rely heavily on the Inspector General and their expertise in looking at this. And again, our hearts and minds and prayers go to the Zapata family. In September of 2012, nearly 5 years ago, the committee and Senator Chuck Grassley requested an investigation of ATF's actions relating to Agent Zapata's death. We presented evidence to the IG obtained from confidential sources as well as whistleblowers. We told the Inspector General that ATF may have had probable cause to arrest the Osorio brothers in November of 2010 when ATF witnessed them providing 40 weapons with obliterated serial numbers to an undercover ATF informant at a Walmart parking lot for the purpose of trafficking those weapons to Mexico. The Department of Justice Inspector General report confirms these facts. ATF's first contact with the Osorios and Morrison, however, did not occur until 3 months after Agent Zapata's murder. So again, information was there, but it was 3 months after Agent Zapata was murdered that the ATF first made contact. It's been more than 6 years since Agent Zapata was murdered in the ambush attack involving U.S. purchased and subsequently trafficked firearms. It's been nearly 5 years since the probe was requested. Today, we want to examine ATF's past practices with respect to investigating straw purchasers and firearms trafficking cases. We've had the ATF here on a couple different occasions dealing with these issues, and yet we are concerned that these problems are still happening. ATF must enforce the existing laws and aggressively stop illegally purchased and possessed firearms. Repeated excuses that the U.S. Attorney Office will not prosecute or that heightened probable cause is necessary, I think should be rejected. You know, I think we do have a further problem with prosecutors prosecuting gun crimes. In fact, this committee is anticipating having hearings on that very subject. It's frustrating not only at the ATF level, but it's frustrating with the TSA. I mean, every day we're taking guns off of airplanes, and yet go try to find a case that's prosecuted. It's rare to none. Seems to be virtually no consequence. And today we aim to bring renewed focus on the incident for not only the Zapata family, but also those other families who serve in our nation and the overall general well-being of the United States of America. We invited ATF Deputy Director Ronald Turk and Special Agent in Charge William Temple to testify today because they can provide some of the answers the Zapata family and their public deserve. The Justice Department doesn't think we need to hear from them. You'll notice that there are 5 seats there, and only 2 have bothered to show up. You know, when Congress, certainly the Oversight Committee, invites you to testify, it's not optional. It's not an exercise of whether or not it's convenient. They will show up, and we'll get to that in a moment. Mr. Temple is the head of the Dallas Field Office, the special agent in charge, and he can provide a unique perspective. He's in the field, one of the most challenging environments for fighting firearms trafficking, and in light of the serious problems that we covered in this IG report, we have to hear from the ATF officials outside of Washington. I'm tired of hearing from just management. I want to hear from the people that are actually on the front lines doing this. As you notice, Mr. Temple is not here either. Department of Justice continues to insist we shouldn't talk to Mr. Turk or Mr. Temple. And I'm going to get back to that later as we go to the questioning. We want to encourage ATF and other law enforcement agencies to place more emphasis on taking down criminals and their tools before they work their will. No law passed by Congress can require federal law enforcement officers to simply do their job. It is tough. It is difficult. It is. I've been on a lot of ride-alongs. I blow in and out in a few hours. They do this day in and day out. They need to know that we got their back. We got their support. We love for them. We love them. We care for them. And if there are problems and challenges that are happening at the front line, we need to know it. Can't get that perspective if when we ask them to be here, some management person says, no, they really don't need to be here. I speak for the agency. I speak for the mass. That's not the way this is going to work. Certainly not going to work in this Congress. It doesn't work for me. So I think the 2 that are here, but Mr. Brandon, you got some questions to answer about why people that work for you aren't here. And we'll get to that in the questioning. And as for Mr. Kraft, You know, when you work as an AUSA, Assistant U.S. Attorney, again, we're going to have some hard discussions with the Department of Justice because they're not above oversight either, and they will be here in the future as well. I've gone well past my time. Let me now recognize Ms. Maloney of New York for her opening statement.
I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing and thank him for his sensitivity for the sacrifice of law enforcement and the pain of families. This is an important hearing. When Special Agent Jaime Zapata was shot and killed in Mexico in February of 2011, he was only 32 years old. He was as enthusiastic and hardworking as any law enforcement agent can be. 6 years ago, this remarkable young man was murdered in an ambush while working in service of his nation. His partner, Special Agent Victor Avila, was gravely injured alongside him. Examining the circumstances of Agent Zapata's death and the shooting of Agent Avila required a thorough and diligent investigation by the Office of Inspector General. I thank Mr. Horowitz and his staff for the report we are discussing today. This report identifies a number of serious problems in the way that ATF, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the U.S. Attorney's Office investigated the trafficking of weapons to Mexico in 2010 and 2011. Many of these issues are not new to us on this committee. We have investigated them over and over again for several years, and we have worked to ensure that these agencies make serious and lasting improvements. The IG's report highlights some very important new facts. For example, it describes how a federal prosecutor in Texas made a very serious mistake in agreeing to release a man by the name of Manuel Barba from federal custody in July of 2010. According to the IG, that prosecutor had DEA reports with Mr. Barba claiming that he was heavily involved in drug trafficking. The IG found that this decision had terrible consequences, and I quote, "Based on the information reasonably knowable to the agents and the prosecutors, it is clear that they should not have agreed to Barber's release from federal custody and left at liberty to direct the straw purchase of one of the assault weapons and its trafficking to Mexico, where it was used in the Zapata Avila shooting," end quote. This prosecutor's supervisor, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Texas, admitted later, and I quote, "We dropped the ball." Well, I've got to say that this Congress has dropped the ball in its support of law enforcement. We had testimony before this committee on Fast and Furious where the agent said, "Give us a tough anti-drug trafficking law." And this committee, between 2011 and 2013, while investigating cigarette smuggling. In 2003, the Justice Department, under Attorney General John Ashcroft, argued in favor of allowing ATF to use churning accounts, asserting that Congress should give ATF authority to use money generated during undercover sting operations to offset their investigative expenses. In response, Congress granted this authority in 2004, and President Bush signed it into law. In 2013, the IG issued a report highlighting numerous accountability problems with these churning accounts between 2006 and 11. In response, ATF says that it stopped using these accounts. The New York Times article alleges that this latest operation, and I quote, "not authorized under Justice Department rules and went beyond what was identified in that audit released in 2013, end quote. We do not have the full story yet. The chairman asked ATF to submit documents, but the due date is not until tomorrow. In addition, litigation referenced in the press report is under seal. Documents on the public docket are heavily redacted, and it's unclear whether ATF has submitted documents in that case. Nevertheless, if the allegations in this press report are true, they raise serious questions. Who authorized it? How was the money used? Did this activity violate department guidelines? Has there been an audit of these accounts to determine whether funds were used improperly? Has anyone been disciplined? And how were the activities described in this report any different than straight-out tobacco smuggling? We will not rush to judgment, but we will seek answers. We will review the documents, we will monitor the litigation to determine whether the case is unsealed, and we will question today's witnesses. Also, Congress has a role. More than 5 years ago, several ATF whistleblowers testified at that very witness table about abuses that they saw firsthand. They called for legislation to make gun trafficking a serious federal crime. They explained that the current penalties for gun trafficking are no more than paperwork violations, and they called them, and I quote, toothless, end quote. In response, I authored legislation in the past 2 Congresses. Our legislation was bipartisan. It had more than 100 co-sponsors from both political parties. It targeted criminals and, most importantly, helped law enforcement do their job. They asked for this. They endorsed it. It was endorsed by local, federal, state police groups, as well as prosecutor organizations with members across this country. Yet our bill received absolutely no action in this House. I will reintroduce it today, and I hope the chairman will grant the request of the ranking member for a hearing so that we can look at solving the problem of gun trafficking that is often with drug cartels and gangs and criminals. And I think it's a very important piece of legislation. It can save lives and prevent guns from getting into hands of criminals that kill good agents such as Jaime Zapata. My time has expired. I thank the chairman for calling this important hearing, and I hope he will grant our request for a hearing on the bill.
Gentlewoman yields back. Thank the gentlewoman. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses. We're pleased to welcome the Honorable Michael Horowitz, Inspector General, the United States Department of Justice. We thank you and all the people that work with you for your service. One of the things we would like you to address, though, is why in the world it took so long to get to this point. It seems excessively long, but again, you have a very storied and rich career in serving our country, and we thank you for that. Mr. Thomas Brandon is the Acting Director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives. Again, we thank you for your service, both in the military, the United States Marines, but also at ATF and working on behalf of the United States of America in a very difficult but very important job, and we thank you again for your service and for your being here today. As you know, pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify, so if you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that both witnesses answered in the affirmative. We'll give you some latitude, but we would appreciate it if you limit your oral testimony to roughly 5 minutes. Again, we'll give you great latitude here, but your entire written statement and any supporting documents will be made part of the record. Mr. Horowitz, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify at today's important hearing. On February 15, 2011, ICE Special Agents Victor Avila and Jaime Zapata were attacked by members of a drug cartel while working in Mexico. Tragically, Agent Zapata did not survive the attack, while Agent Avila was seriously injured. 2 firearms used in that attack were traced to purchases in Texas made by Otilio Osorio and Robert Reinflesch, both of whom were connected to then ongoing DOJ criminal investigations. Our review examined the information that the ATF, DEA, FBI, and the Department of Justice obtained about the illegal narcotics and gun trafficking activities of Osorio, Rindfleisch, and their associates prior to the attack on Agents Zapata and Avila. Our review of ATF's investigation of Osorio, his brother Ranferi Osorio, and neighbor Kelvin Morrison found numerous problems with the timeliness of ATF's response to mounting evidence that the individuals were committing firearms trafficking offenses. We found that ATF had collected sufficient information prior to Osorio's purchase on October 10, 2010, of the firearm that was later used in the attack on Agent Zapata and Avila to justify questioning his brother and Morrison or taking other investigative steps regarding their firearms purchases. Our review also found that approximately 1 month after Osorio's firearm purchase, the Osorio brothers were recorded transferring 40 firearms, 37 with obliterated serial numbers. Despite this information, ATF's first contact with the Osorios and Morrison did not occur until late February 2011, following the attack on the agents. In addition, our review identified one instance which occurred after the attacks on Agents Avila and Zapata, where we believe ATF had both the legal authority and opportunity to seize firearms in the Osorio's possession, but did not. 2 of the firearms that could have been seized were later recovered at a crime scene in Mexico. We concluded that the ATF supervisor in the Dallas Field Division was not sufficiently proactive and failed to ensure that all of ATF's leads were investigated, that consultations with prosecutors were started, and that there was adequate coordination within ATF and with the DEA. We further determined that ATF delayed its investigation and arrests of the Osorios and Morrison for reasons that lacked sufficient justification. We also identified serious deficiencies with DEA's handling of its narcotics investigation of Manuel Barba, the person who trafficked the firearm purchased by Rindfleisch. The DEA uncovered information about Barba's potential gun trafficking in May 2010, yet never shared it with ATF. As a result, ATF only learned of Barba's gun trafficking as a result of its own investigation in August 2010, after the sale of the Rindfleisch firearm. We further determined that the AUSA handling the DEA narcotics prosecution of Barba should not have agreed to Barba's release from jail in July 2010 following his arrest. That decision left Barba at liberty to lead a group of firearms traffickers and direct the straw purchase and trafficking of the Rindfleisch firearm to Mexico. We were not persuaded by DEA's explanations for not passing on evidence of Barba's firearms trafficking activities to ATF, and we determined that there's room for improvement in DEA's policy to clearly require such communication in appropriate circumstances. As part of our oversight work concerning ATF's Operation Fast and Furious, we previously encouraged DEA to develop policies that provide clear guidance to its agents about when to contact ATF, but to date, DEA has not implemented that recommendation. With respect to ATF's own investigation of Barba and Rindfleisch, we found that ATF agents in that investigation diligently pursued leads, took effective investigative steps, and appropriately consulted and coordinated their activities with prosecutors. We did not identify any failure to take action by the ATF agents that might reasonably have prevented the trafficking of the Rindfleisch firearm. We did not make formal recommendations in this report because we believe our recommendations in the Operation Fast and Furious review that we did and in our recent follow-up review on the Operation Fast and Furious recommendations were sufficient to address the deficiencies we found in this review. We look forward to working with this committee and the department to address the concerns identified in all of our reviews with regard to gun trafficking, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brandon, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I welcome the opportunity to discuss the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General reports titled Review of Investigations of the Osorio and Barba Firearms Trafficking Rings and ATF's Use of Income-Generating Undercover Operations. I appreciate the work of the OIG in these matters. We agree with all of the findings in both reports, and ATF has implemented all of the recommendations from the 2013 report. I will continue to work closely with the Inspector General to further improve ATF. Before addressing those matters, however, I want to express the deep felt condolences of all the men and women of ATF to the family, friends, and colleagues of Special Agents Jaime Zapata and Victor Avila for the loss and suffering they have endured. Anytime a law enforcement officer is lost in the line of duty, is it a tragedy that affects everyone. And over my career, I have had friends and colleagues killed in the line of duty. And every morning I contemplate the sacrifice that law enforcement officers have made on my behalf and on behalf of all Americans. I make my decisions as ATF's acting director with this in mind. Mr. Chairman, you know that I'm a career special agent. I'm not a political appointee. I've worked the streets in Detroit, LA, and Phoenix. I understand the impact a law enforcement career has on a family. So when I say that every day ATF special agents, investigators, and professional staff work tirelessly to remove the most violent offenders from the streets and make our communities safer, I speak from the heart and the very essence of my being. I have been there myself. It's not a talking point for me. It has been my life, and I am honored and proud to lead the men and women of ATF. Leadership requires from time to time that we turn inward and examine ourselves. The DOJ OIG has helped us do that. I have closely read the OIG report on the Osario and Barber gun trafficking rings, and I thank the Inspector General for the thorough assessments of the events involved in those investigations. In particular, the OIG pointed out where ATF could make improvements to communications and information dissemination. ATF could and should have done better. We make no excuses, and I accept full responsibility for the lapses in 2010 and 2011. These events occurred more than 7 years ago, before substantial leadership changes were implemented at ATF. The ATF of 2017 is not the ATF of 2010. Let me tell you how ATF has changed since that time. Since my arrival as the ATF Deputy Director in the fall of 2011, I've brought a laser focus to enhancing communication, operational oversight, and accountability to ensure that our investigations are effective, focused, and efficiently executed. In particular, hard lessons have taught us that the level of complexity involved in firearms trafficking investigations demand constant organizational vigilance, management oversight, and that effective communication is essential to success in these high-stakes cases. To meet these demands, ATF has implemented a broad range of organizational improvements during my tenure. These improvements include implementation of Frontline, it's ATF's intelligence-led, risk-based business model, establishment of crime gun intelligence centers in every ATF field division, focused hiring of intelligence research specialists with an emphasis on those with military experience, establishment of a formal ATF internal communications plan, enhancement of ATF's monitored case program, enhancement of mandatory leadership command and control training for first-line supervisors and management, and mandatory training for all agents on firearms trafficking techniques. I want to assure the committee for as long as I'm privileged to lead ATF, we will continue to identify areas where we can further strengthen our operational effectiveness. I also understand the committee's interest in recent media reports regarding ATF tobacco investigation. That investigation is the subject of an ongoing federal civil lawsuit, and the court has sealed the case pending trial. The United States is a party to that litigation, and therefore the court's order is binding on ATF and me. Consequently, my ability to respond to questions specific to that investigation is extremely limited at this time. What I can advise the committee is that the OIG conducted a full program audit of ATF's income-generating undercover activities beginning in 2011 and issued a comprehensive report in September 2013. That report, which evaluated the period of 2006 to 2011, identified serious deficiencies in ATF's policies and controls over those investigations. Before the OIG issued the report, ATF had internally recognized the need for more robust policies, procedures, and oversight on income-generating undercover activity investigations and had begun implementing enhancements in 2011. In April 2013, ATF issued a comprehensive order governing tobacco investigations, including strict rules on the use of income-generating undercover activities. ATF is not currently using this technique and has not done so since 2013 and will not do so in the future unless very specific and limited parameters are met. ATF has closed all of these bank accounts and deposited all remaining funds from those accounts in the U.S. Treasury General Fund. Beyond implementation and strict enforcement of the April 2013 order, as noted, ATF has implemented all of the OAG's 2013 recommendations, and as a result, by October 2015, the OAG has closed all of its recommendations. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am proud to be here today representing the men and women of ATF. They work diligently every day to keep our community safer. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Brandon, you have been the acting director for a year and 11 months now, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Turk and Mr. Temple work for you?
They do.
Why are they not here?
When we received the request, the invitation to testify, Mr. Chairman, I met with my team, consulted with DOJ, and wanted to quickly respond by having someone here from ATF, and that person would be me.
But the invitation was to yourself, Mr. Turk, and Mr. Temple, and you unilaterally decided that Mr. Turk and Mr. Temple would not be here?
No, I did not.
Who decided that Mr. Turk and Mr. Temple were not going to be here?
Well, the decision is theirs voluntarily. To let you know, Mr. Chairman, I didn't order them not to be here, and no one that I know of from the department ordered them not to be here.
So they personally chose not to be here?
That's their free decision, but also I agreed with it. I'm not going to duck anything here.
So they just decided that coming before Congress was an optional activity and that they were not going to do it. I think I understand. You understand that I have, do you know what a subpoena is, Mr. Brandon?
Yes, I do.
What does a subpoena require you to do?
To appear before the court or the legislative body in this case.
See this subpoena right here? I don't have to ask a judge. I don't need to get a vote here. We are now hereby subpoenaing here's one for Mr. Turk. He used to testify before this committee in a deposition on March 21st. Is there any reason he cannot attend at that time?
I don't believe so.
He will be served this subpoena. Mr. Temple, he's going to present himself for a deposition, which is a much more difficult thing than appearing before Congress. These things go on for hours under oath. Any reason he can't be here on March 22nd at 10 a.m.?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And you're the director, you're the acting director, so you can help make sure that his schedule is free to be here at that time?
I will make sure of that.
I just issued a subpoena for Mr. Temple as well. He will present himself before this committee. These are not optional exercises. Now, Mr. Kraft was given a little bit shorter notice. We're going to have that discussion with the Department of Justice. He was the minority witness that was requested by Mr. Cummings to be here. His non-presence is also totally and wholly unacceptable, and we'll figure out how to best move forward on him. These are not optional exercises. You're wasting this committee's time by allowing Mr. Turk and Mr. Temple to think anything other than when they're invited to come to Congress, they will come to Congress. And when I send you a notice on Thursday of last week, for you to contact your department, your agency, your people, for them to contact our office last night in the 5 o'clock hour is totally and wholly unacceptable. There is no excuse for that, and we will not tolerate that. And if I need to issue a subpoena at the get-go, you tell me. We will do that every time because they should have been here today. And if you had given us the proper notice, as was laid out in the letter, which says that you will contact the committee by March 6th, which you did not, then we would have issued a subpoena and they'd be here today and we'd have a more full and complete hearing. And everybody in this audience, and especially the Zapata family, could hear from these people. Do we understand each other?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we do. And I apologize if there was a communication as late as yesterday. I was under the understanding that there was communication. And if there was a subpoena, obviously they would be here. But I hear you loud and clear.
Chairman, would you yield?
Yes, I
for a
yield.
second. Mr. Brandon, I think the thing that concerned me more is when you said you agreed with the decision of them not to come. You understand the significance of a subpoena, do you not? And a request that your agents be here. But you just sat there and said you agreed with their decision. So apparently there was some back and forth, and you being their boss, I'm just trying to figure out, you know, what part you played in all of that, because that bothers me. It also bothers me that, you know, that the late getting back to us. I mean, I think we try to accommodate, But when we get something, a response the evening before, that's kind of rough. But tell me what part you played, and I just want to be clear on this.
Oh, thank you, sir.
You're their boss now, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
We got the invitations, not subpoenas, and I was told that normally we would get more time to respond within a 14-day rule. We wanted to absolutely appear here and be prepared, and that in talking to the department, which had a lot of things going on with hearings, that this was the proper way to handle.
But you said you agreed. You said you agreed with the decision for them not to be here. See, that puts us in a kind of awkward position. We got the boss who says, okay, guys, you don't have to show up. And that sends a hell of a message. That's a problem. Come on now.
It was meant to be not anything disrespectful to this committee, and trying to say, okay, who is going to represent the agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jaime Zapata was killed about 6 years ago. There's been an investigation nearly 5 years. When did you get the report from the Department of Justice, the Inspector General? How long ago did you get the initial draft of the report?
The members of my team received the report, and it was the back and forth with edits, and I received it, I believe, approximately a month ago to read it.
Mr. Horwitz, do you have a more specific time?
I can get you a more specific time, but it would probably be about a month to 6 weeks ago if I can check and just get a more refined.
So your excuse that you needed more time, that it just ain't flying. Okay? When you had to know that we were deeply interested in this. And if you get the report 4 to 6 weeks ago, you're going back and forth with edits. My understanding is that members of the ATF actually got a draft in December. Mr. Horwitz?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. It was
so you
December.
get it in December, and now your complaint is you didn't have enough time to prepare for this hearing. And that's why, in part, we invited Mr. Temple here, because my concern is 6 years after we had an American killed, an agent killed, that you all haven't got the lesson. So don't tell me that you need more time, because if you can't communicate to Congress that you get it and that you're implementing the changes, my guess is all those men and women, the thousands of people out in the field, they haven't gotten the message either. And that's the concern. That's the concern. You all try to dress it up so that you come to Congress and put the best looking picture it can. We want the raw truth of what's happening, what those men and women are having to deal with on the front lines. So the idea that you needed more time and we didn't get the customary 2 weeks is a load of crap. And you know it because you've had this since December. And that's my frustration. I could go on, but my time has expired. We'll now recognize Ms. Maloney of New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Brandon to respond to my comments concerning really Congress not giving you the tools that you need to get the job done. When Congress first began working on this, and we were looking into the shooting death of Agent Zapata in 2012, we were already in 2011, I believe it was. We were already in the midst of an investigation of the so-called Operation Fast and Furious, and that was the botched attempt to target gun traffickers connected to Mexican drug cartels. And we had whistleblowers testify, sitting right where you are right now, Mr. Brandon, and then they asked us to give them the tools to get the job done. I can remember it like yesterday. He said, we don't even bother to go after serious gun traffickers because there's no enforcement, and even if you caught them, you can't do anything to them. It's just a paper violation. Quote, a paper violation. Give us the tools, make it a felony, make it a crime, and crack down on these straw purchasers who buy guns for criminals and then use them to kill our agents. Well, we did. Mr. Cummings and I, along with members of the Republican Party and actually Senator Duckworth, she was then a member of this committee, we drafted a bill that crack down, and it's been universally endorsed by law enforcement across the country. Now, that was 5 years ago. So I'd like to ask Mr. Brandon, is it true that today there is no such dedicated statute targeting gun trafficking? Is gun trafficking still just a paper violation, as your agent testified before us 5 years ago?
Yes, ma'am. Nothing's changed.
And how big a problem is it? That makes guns flow easily, not only through Mexico, but probably throughout the world. I was talking to a representative from the Caribbean. They say guns flow all over the Caribbean from the U.S., but there's no law against it. Is that correct?
That's true, ma'am, and there's no doubt a firearms trafficking statute would help deal with the gun violence in America.
Then I really want to ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join Ranking Member Cummings and other members of this committee. Ms. Kelly was very active in it, as there was a lot of violence in the district that she represents. And I, for one, thought after we had Newtown, when the 23 young children were killed, that we would act on gun violence. But the one bill that has bipartisan support and the one bill that law enforcement has come out almost universally in support of is give us the tools to do the job. So my question is, if we did make that a federal felony, if we did crack down on straw purchases, would that help you? Would that help our law enforcement, not just ATF, but all law enforcement, do their job in a better way to protect people?
Yes, ma'am, it would, in my opinion, absolutely.
Now, the bill was supported by the American Bar Association, the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, Major Cities Chiefs Association, but most importantly, in my mind, the police and fire that are on the front line in the district that I represent across this country. So let me ask you, Mr. Brandon, how serious is the problem of gun trafficking along the southwest border today? Has the concern in any way gone away?
The concern is not. We at ATF, without having that statute and with the laws that we enforce, have given credit for agents to have interdiction and deterrence of firearms rather than waiting for building a criminal case and where guns can get to the criminal element and be misused to shoot and hurt people. We're doing the best with what we have, and so with interdiction and deterrence, we refer to it as being on the left side of boom. And that's one of the strategies we have taken. But firearms trafficking along the southwest border and across the United States still is a problem.
Well, it's one that we can address. And for all of the talk of building a wall that may cost tens of billions of dollars along the southwest border, there is remarkably little talk about passing this law, which costs nothing. This would cost nothing to the taxpayer to enact this law, which then would give our law enforcement the ability to better protect the American people. And it seems to me that it's just common sense. And our chairman is a common sense guy, so I hope he will join the ranking member and myself.